everybody. My name is Emily. I am an admissions representative here at Design Lab, and I'm going to be facilitating our webinar today. With us, we have Evan. He is going to be presenting our webinar about product design storytelling. He's going to jump into a deck and get started in a couple minutes. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping things before we get started. First and foremost, I want to direct your attention to the chat. You can feel free to say hi, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're tuning in from if you'd like. Both Evan and I are actually tuning in from New Jersey. And just to give you all a little disclaimer, there's noise happening. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I have some people working near my house, so sorry for the noise.
No worries. So just to give everyone a little disclaimer, the weather here is looking a little bit sketchy. So hopefully we will not get, torrential rain and we'll experience no interruptions. But I just wanted to let you know that it is something we are keeping an eye on. I also wanted to feel free to, say hello, share your name. If you want to share your LinkedIn or an Instagram or anything, you can definitely feel free to do so in the chat. And then right next to the chat, you'll see that there is a questions tab. If you click into the questions tab, if you have any questions for Evan as we're going through the presentation, you can share them in there. Evan is going to be doing a Q&A at the end as well, so he'll go through those questions. Everyone who is registered for this event is going to be receiving a recording. I believe it's also going to go on our Design Lab YouTube channel, so you can always reference it later on if you'd like, if you need to leave early, or if you hear something that you'd really like to check out again. And then last but not least, you do have the option to hide the chat as well. If you look in the bottom of the screen, there's some display setups that you can play around with. You can hide the chat, just click the X, etc. if you're finding it distracting or anything. Cool. So that is all for me. I'm going to stop chatting and hand over to Evan now, who is going to be jumping into his presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And yeah, just to kind of reiterate a few things that you said, I am totally fine. If you guys have questions on the fly, I can help answer them. So feel free to post them in the chat. And, I know we can kind of coordinate that and try to answer some things during, but also afterwards. So let me share my screen and then we can kick this thing off. Alrighty. So product design storytelling, effective communication for the non-believers. This is a topic I kind of had in mind for a while since I started my career in UX and kind of converted to product design. So before I actually kick off the actual presentation, I just wanted to give some context on who I am. My name is Evan Canarozzi. I'm a product design lead at EY. So I'm responsible for creating successful user experiences for client-facing products. I work with product managers, stakeholders, clients, developers, and other designers collaboratively so we can ship products that make people's lives easier. Also a certified Scrum Master issued in 2021. So I know a little bit about Agile. And what we're going to be talking about today is a few things here. So today we're going to be talking about storytelling. And it might not be the storytelling that you're thinking of. It's how we tell stories in the product design space. And what that means is, how do we craft our conversations and meetings to deal with any type of audience, right? So stakeholders, clients, product team members, developers, and how do we sell our ideas? I'll also be doing a 10-minute Figma demo. It's one of my favorite tools. I'm immersed in it. I use it all the time. I've made this presentation with it. I use it constantly. So we all know that that's a pretty big tool that we are using in the design space. So I'll be doing a demo on how we can build a UI together using a lot of input from the team here and the audience, right? So that'll be kind of a fun collaborative thing we can do. We'll also be talking about the 80% rule and how we avoid burnout. Product design is very demanding, and how do we overcompensate, or how do we compensate for those demands? And it's a tip that I got from a friend. It's something that I use daily, so I'm happy to share that with you guys later on. And last but not least, we'll be discussing how we define product design and the differences between a product designer and a UX designer, and the fine line between the two. So let's jump into that as my first talking point here. All right, so this is actually where I would like to get some engagement from the audience here. So based on what you guys know, what does a product designer do? So that could be anything in terms of the role, responsibilities, and all I need is 5. So what we're going to do is, if we can get some communication going, get some comments in here, and I'm just going to extract 5 from the audience. So if you guys could start typing stuff in, I'll put them in on the screen as we're going. Solve problems. That seems like that's the main one. All right, solve problems. All right, what else we got? Let's be a little more descriptive, right? I love the one-liners, right? Let's put it a little bit more in sentence form. So, like, what do we mean by wireframing or usability testing? I saw focus on business goals. That's a really good one. Focus on business goals. I like that one. Own a product from end to end. A product from end to end. Craft digital experiences. That's a good one. Let's put that one in there. Okay, and we need one more. Create systems that enable users to interact with. Let's use this one from Ross. Create systems that enable users to interact with business successfully. Sorry if I spelled anything wrong there. I'm not sure if I did. Okay. All right. So let's take a pause there. And thanks everyone for participating. We got a huge list here. That's awesome. So let's compare this now, right? Based on what you guys just said, let's pull up a comparison sheet. And what I did here was I pulled from a bunch of different articles, right? Some's from medium.com, some's from UX Collective, basically a bunch of user experience and product design resources to sort of compare the two. Okay. And let's see if these line up with what we just said. Involved in the product from kickoff. I heard end-to-end user experience or an end-to-end being involved from the beginning to end of the product cycle. That's pretty much it, right? Understanding business goals. We've heard that one. We have to meet business goals, not only end user goals. Understanding the product's inventory. I'm not sure if I heard this one, but this is important to note, right? Getting involved with the development backlog so we know the priorities. Highly involved with the product manager. That's crucial. What else do we know? We know that product designer is responsible to lead the design team and to be constantly collaborating. We also know that they're responsible for creating the user experience, right? UI principles, they work with, or sometimes they are the user researcher, and they also help design the user interface. And last, but definitely not least, is they're never really done evolving. So the product designers are constantly morphing. We're adapting to change, especially with everything going on in AI right now. So how can we separate ourselves from the pack to actually still be valuable and how we teach our practices in a meaningful way? Okay, UX designer. So what are they responsible for? Keyword here is may. They may only focus on parts of UX and UI. Not every case, but it's a variable, right? Sometimes there's a lot of demand for them to do that. Sometimes they're only part of the process, right? Maybe less management responsibilities. The UX designers may only be staffed to a product for a certain period of time, right? So there's certain cases where it happens in real life scenarios all the time. They're assigned or they're allocated to a product for maybe only a PI planning session or, a certain amount of months until they roll off from that product. They may be less involved with quality assurance, maybe less involved with the development teams, right? Again, it's a variable. Not in every case. They should be responsible for that, but sometimes they're not. And they also may focus more on end user needs as opposed to business goals, right? So those are the differences, but the key difference is the product designer is expected to know more, right? So they're a little bit more responsible for taking initiative and playing a leadership role. Whereas I said before, UX designer is a little bit more of a variable. They should be playing a leadership role, but sometimes that's not always the case, right? I'm a good example of that. When I started as a UX designer, I had multiple roles where a lot of the times when I was staffed to a product, I was only doing desk work, screen designing, sending it off to a developer, and then I was done, right? I wasn't really facilitating workshops. I wasn't really doing meetings. Eventually I did, but I was still considered a UX designer. When I got into a product design lead role, I was expected to facilitate workshops. I was expected to take more ownership over the product itself and be a little bit more involved with business goals. So those are the sort of key differences between the two, but you can see there's a lot of overlap. Okay. So now I want to talk to you guys about sort of my experience with the job and something that can relate to all of you, especially if there's a lot of new joiners here, in terms of getting your feet wet with the product design space and what to expect when you get a job. So maybe more on the student side, less on, people that are already product designers in working positions. So my first few weeks on the job, straight up, I got the jitters. I was nervous. I got the jitters, right? So I was nervous and excited at the same time. I went through a few phases. My first phase was just that feeling of uneasiness. Like I had to sort of train myself to be comfortable being uncomfortable, just kind of getting used to that feeling of uneasiness. I was meeting new team members. I was adjusting to the workload, typical issues that people run into in any new job, right? Phase two is when I started to get comfortable, right? Maybe a couple months in, I started. This is when I'm talking about when I was more in the product design lead space, right? When I turned from a UX designer into a product design lead position. So this is where I started to lead with humility. And what I mean by this is I still made mistakes. I was still learning, but I own those mistakes. And it kind of takes the pressure off knowing that you're not going to hit, you know, you're not going to be perfect at every workshop that you facilitate. You're not going to be perfect in a prototype you're working on. You're not going to be perfect in knowing all the UI principles right away. That's an adjustment period. You learn that over time, right? So knowing that, leading with humility and working with the team to kind of help you along the way, that helps to just, take that burden off you to know that you're going to make mistakes and it's okay to make mistakes. Phase three is letting people know who you are. So from start to finish, even though I was nervous, I let people know who I was all the time. I would, establish a brand for myself. I would go into meetings and saying, "Hey, I'm Evan. I'm the product design lead. I'll be supporting the user experience for this product." I was very inquisitive. I asked questions early, and I got involved in the process early enough to let people know who I was. So these three phases sort of work in tandem, and it's really important to make sure that you kind of have these things in your back pocket as you're facilitating meetings or workshops, so that people know who you are. They know that you're human, you're humble, you make mistakes, but you learn from them. So you're not a know-it-all, right? And it's okay to be nervous. Getting over that hump will turn that into confidence. And that can be applied for anything, right? Even if it's just a meeting with developers, product team members, the product team members, or even stakeholders or clients. That sort of methodology in terms of owning your mistakes if you make them and move on quickly, and being confident is what's going to kind of propel you forward in this design space. All right. Humans are messy. We know that. So is product design. So something that I like to do is I like to find an idol that I follow that I think is very good in conducting interviews and really does his homework. And my pick is Jon Stewart. So if anyone's ever seen any of his interviews or the work that he's done or his podcast, he's very, very well spoken. He speaks slowly. He speaks with conviction, and he really knows his source material. So when he's doing interviews, if you notice people counter him and try to argue with him, he always has a counter. And he's very, very omniscient in the topics that he's talking about, so that he knows his material and he's able to sort of convince the other person sometimes that what he's saying is better than what they're saying. Now, I'm not saying it's a competition, but I'm saying a lot of the times you're going to get pushback. You're going to get clients that disagree with you. You're going to have to really sell your ideas to let them know that you know what you're talking about, one, and two, what you're providing is a useful experience and it's going to help them in the long run. So he's my guy. I use Jon Stewart, but this could work with any idol, and preferably someone on stage, right? Someone that, has a lot of, experience is definitely someone to kind of help you look up to. And that's important to note because product designers have so many things to worry about, right? Just the life cycle alone for UX and product design, the list goes on. There's 20, 30, 40 things you have to worry about. Sometimes we lose sight of, we have to be public speakers, right? Like we have to know how to talk to people. We have to be comfortable facilitating meetings. We have to be comfortable countering arguments. So it's really good to think of an idol to kind of help you in those types of situations. Okay. So convince those who don't believe in the process. This could be stakeholders, business analysts, product managers, clients, developers. So if you guys noticed, I've already repeated those types of people multiple times, right? Really tough job. Yeah, agree, Kamal. So that's a very hard part to accommodate because there's so many cooks in the kitchen, right? But those are the groups that we're constantly dealing with. So how we deal with that is by repeating parts of the story, right? You have to remember that We as the designers are living in this work day in and day out. We breathe the work. Our clients or our stakeholders may not see it that way. It might be 15% of their time where they're thinking about a prototype that you might be sharing that you've spent a month on, right? So tell them, and then tell them again. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to really convince our users to trust the process, we need to repeat pieces of the story. So there's material that you need going into calls like this, right? And it's sort of like a bundle of things, right? Live demos are a huge one. We found that to be very effective at my job, where we do something called pivot research, which is a really cool thing that I actually learned from someone else on our team. He wasn't even a designer. He did a presentation, and what he did was do some live wireframe demoing on the spot, and he really got engagement from the audience. So we took it to another level, and we use Figma and the power of auto layout, and I can show that in a minute. And last but not least is making sure that when you're doing these types of presentations, you include everybody. Even non-designers can have design ideas. We've heard of the napkin idea, which is essentially sometimes like a product owner or someone that's not a designer will sketch out an idea on a napkin or a piece of paper, show it to the team. Sometimes it could turn out to be a great feature. So that goes back to the humility part. That is, you as a product designer can lead and dictate the design process, but you don't always have to have every idea. It's important to know that even non-designers can have good ideas, and those can turn into successful features. Okay. So back to the equipment part of that, which is like the materials that we need for a meeting. A real life scenario is a lot of the times in the product design space, you can get thrown into a feature. You could either another designer came off the product and then you got pulled in, or for whatever reason you got thrown into a feature or a product mid-flight, right? So you're not able to start from scratch and do every step of the UX lifecycle. So this is a good real life working example of when that happens, how do you deal with it? So for this example, let's say we're building an application, we got thrown into the middle of it, and it looks like there was a designer on hand and he's already done a few things, right? He's already identified the problem issues, the problem statements, there's been research done, and there's requirements now that have been demanded from the end users, right? So it's sort of like putting IKEA furniture together. On the left-hand side, if you do what this guy does, maybe you think the feature is easy and you don't need to do any homework, and you kind of go in blind and you have problems. You can't assemble, you don't have the instruction manual. You can't really assemble this dresser that you're putting together because you anticipated it to be easy, but it wasn't. And now you're scrambling live on a call. So what you want to do is do your homework. Before you do these calls, collaborate with your team, have some help. It shouldn't only be on you. Make sure that you understand the problem statement, you know the research that's been done, and you know the requirements. So for this example, this is in a minute, we're actually going to do some live landing page building. I'm going to have some input from the team here so that we can actually build this together. So that should be fun. In this example, we're dealing with an application called DocHelp. Not the greatest name. I'm not in marketing, so I'm sure you guys probably could think of something better, but that's what I came up with. And this application is for patients that need healthcare, right? So the problem statement that we've learned is that patients are struggling to make appointments with their doctors. The process is confusing. There are long wait times to hear back from receptionists on availability, and it's a hassle to ensure their insurance is in network, right? That's our problem. The research that's been done looks like the previous designer identified their personas, met with the business to understand their needs, and they've identified, which now you've identified, that they are requesting a telemedicine application where patients can easily get care. So that's our research that's been done. Requirements, it looks like the end users care about the appointments. So they want to know when their appointments are. They want to know their paperwork. So they basically want to make sure that they don't have to do anything in person. They want to do all their paperwork online, right? So it's easy for them. Doctors available. They want to know the doctors that are available in their network, and they want to know insurance information. So that's easily accessible to send to providers. They also care about, a list of their bills and scheduling a visit, right? So a bunch of stuff, but these essentially are going to be our components that we're going to use to build a landing page. So now what I want to do is I'm going to share a Figma file. I'm going to share it on the screen. I'm not going to share it in the chat, but what we're going to do is design a dashboard together. So let me share my screen again. Okay. Try to zoom in here so you guys can see it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to time this because I want to see how far we get in 10 minutes. So starting now, I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to explain our material again. And then I'm going to explain the components that I have, and then we're going to build a dashboard together. So I'm going to ask you guys in a minute to start giving me, like, based on what the components that we have that we're using here, what you guys think is the highest priority. So let's start the clock. And let me share the clock as well. 1 second. And I apologize for the banging. There's some construction going on. Okay. All right. Let me reset the clock here. So we got 10 minutes here, but we're probably going to be, my guess is we're going to get this done in under 10 minutes. So let's go back to our problem, right? We're making a telemedicine application. It's web-based, right? So the problem statement is patients are struggling to make an appointment, right? The research done is, yep, correct, landing page only. The research is identifying your personas. We've done that, and we've understood that they need an app to help patients get care. And then we have our requirements, right? So these are all of our requirements. So we have appointments. We have a component for doctors available, for our paperwork. This is desktop only, not mobile. So just FYI to the team here. And then we have a card for our bills. And then we have an insurance card. So these are all used with auto layout and variants, right? So we can kind of toggle this on and off. If you guys want the health insurance to be stacked like this, or if you want it to be wide like this, so we can fill the space. But what we're going to be doing is putting them down here, right? So to help you guys out and to guide this a little bit, I already have the navigation in place and the header, right? So all we have to do is fill in the middle content. So the first thing I want to ask you guys is, whenever you're dealing with an application like this, if it's web-based, do you guys prefer the menu navigation to be expanded where you could see the text, or collapsed where you can only see the icons? I'll give you guys a minute to think about that. Expanded, collapsed, expanded. All right. I'm seeing a lot of expanded. We're going to go with that. Okay. So it looks like most of the room here wants this to be expanded, I'm assuming, because you can see the text. So we're going to start with the expanded view of the navigation. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start, yep, agreed on that last one, David, expand on hover. So for this example, we're just going to leave this expanded, right? But agreed that, we can do hover states and things like that. And that would realistically be how the application works. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start pulling down some of these components. And let me just double check the clock here. All right, so we're a couple minutes in. So now, what do you guys care about first? Do you guys care about the appointments, doctors available, profile? This is sort of a block, right? We can kind of put this together if we want. Or do you guys care about the bills or the insurance information? Appointments. Okay, cool. Lots of appointments. So let's do that. Just going to drop that in here. And because we're using auto layout, things are just going to snap into the grid, right? And I know it's kind of hard to see. Let me zoom in here. All right. So let's say I saw a lot of appointments, and then I saw a few. What else did we see? Appointments. And then I saw some bills, right? So why don't we try this? Let's say that we have these three at the top, right? Because this is sort of a package deal. So we have appointments, doctors available, and profile. So let's do that here. And then you guys tell me the order here, right? So do you guys think my appointment should be first, doctors available should be second, and profile should be third? Or you guys think we should reorder this? 1 appointment, 2 doctors available. What order makes sense to me? Profile third, leave it. Okay, awesome. So let's leave that. We can always change it later, right? So if we want to come back and refine this, we can. So we're keeping this as is. So this first requirement is knocked off. So we're building a dashboard, and we've done this, I'm just letting you guys know, this is something that we've done effectively with my job, where we've done this with stakeholders. So the next piece is, what do we have left? We have bills and we have insurance information. And this is where we can be flexible, right? So you guys have to put on your design ad here. So if you want them side by side, or if you maybe want the bills first and the insurance card at the bottom, What are you guys thinking? What's more important to you? Do you care about the bills or the insurance information? I see Caroline said bills, bills, bills. Okay, I agree. A lot of bills. So let's start putting in our bills. And again, this is using Figma's auto layout, right? So we can easily kind of snap the stuff to the grid. I'm going to put in just 5 for an example, right? And this is a variant. So I'm going to put these as some of them as pending, some of them as past due, right? Okay, so now we have insurance info can go in your profile. Agreed. That's one way to do it. For this example, let's just say to use the space, we have one piece left. We have our insurance card. So there's 2 ways I think we could do this. If I were to guide here, we can either put them side by side like this, where we can kind of, let me just update this. We can kind of put them left and right. So do you guys think that this view looks better in terms of like how the layout looks? Or do you prefer if they're flipped where maybe these go on the left and then the card goes on, I'm sorry, the bills go on the right, the card goes on the left? I like this layout. Okay. Keep. I like how it is right now. Okay, awesome. All right. Let's just, for this example, let's keep this as is, right? So let me check the clock. In about 6 minutes, we established the problem statement. We understood what research has been done. We went through the requirements and we built the UI with the team here using Figma and auto layout. So a really effective way to get your audience to engage with you or get your stakeholders to engage with you where you can actually design in real time. Because a lot of the times when we're doing exercises like this, it's a lot of back and forth. We're taking sticky notes. We're doing all this workshop work, and then we have to take it back, and then we have to design something, and then we have to call them back. We have to do a separate meeting. Hey, this is what we came up with. They might say, yeah, this looks good, but I'd rather like we have bills on the right, and maybe we can have like the appointments in a different spot. Can you go back and revise it? So instead of doing what could essentially be 2 or 3 hours worth of work, we've done this live with the stakeholders on the call to kind of show them in real time that we can help build them a page while validating the problem at the same time, right? So that's sort of the point of this exercise. And this is the advanced version of this, right? This is like a high fidelity prototype or Figma example that we're using. This could work with anything. If you're using any whiteboarding tools like Mural or Miro, where you can actually draw things out in a whiteboard, you could do it in a wireframe. You could do it with a piece of paper. You don't need Figma for that. Figma does help in terms of like helping you lay things out easier so they can kind of see it in real time. But again, this can be applied in any type of whiteboarding situation. So that's that one real life example that I wanted to share. And thanks everyone for participating. That was really helpful. And just to show you guys, this is kind of what we guided, what we just walked through. This was my original version. So pretty similar. I think the only difference is like I added text to show the difference between like the items at the top and the bills and stuff like that, but pretty close. So it's good to know that we kind of have similar design styles. All right. I'm going to stop and share the presentation again. So let me switch over here. Okay. So what I just went through on the previous slide, that was one piece of the puzzle, right? Just the UI being built, that was one specific piece of the product. Maybe 20% of the full product design lifecycle, right? So, when you're a product designer and you're responsible for all this stuff, that's a lot. Like basically looking at everything on the screen here, like in terms of the bubbles here, that's a lot of stuff, right? There's user research, there's discovery, there's user interviews, there's personas, ideation, affinity mapping. I can go on and on and on. And this isn't even touching on what we need to do from like a development standpoint and how we're involved with the developers, right? So how do we deal with all of this chaos? And how do we get support from the people that we need? And it really depends on the team, right? Like if you're lucky enough to have other designers helping you, this can be less overwhelming. But just looking at this in one single screen to see that you have 15 items here, and sometimes those 15 items are responsible on just one person, and they want to get things done quickly, right? So it's a bit overwhelming. So how do we counter this? And one method that I learned from a friend is get to 80%, not 100, right? So what that means is your definition of 100% may not be your user's definition of 100%. So let me say that again. Your 100% may not be 100% valuable to your users. So what that means is, for example, if you're working on a prototype or a wireframe or some type of design that you might have spent 2 or 3 weeks on, and you worked really, really hard on it, you feel like you put in 100% of your effort and your time, and you backed it with your research. If you show it to a stakeholder or a client, they may not like it. They're looking at it differently in terms of your value and all the effort that you're putting into it. They don't really care about that. They care about what's useful to them. So to kind of counter that, if you cap that, oops, sorry, that was the timer. Let me close that. So to counter that, it's important to not over exceed the expectation of getting to 100%. You want to get to 80%, right? And what that does is help you kind of scale down that time. So instead of spending 1 or 2 or 3 weeks on that prototype, maybe you spend a week on it. Maybe you get it to good enough shape where you feel pretty good about it. You run into some team members, and then you get it in front of people. And then you can fail fast. You get the user feedback you need, but you shave down that time from 3 weeks to 1 week, right? So fail fast and learn quick. You can always go back and refine later. Going for 100%, especially in the product design space, will cause burnout. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. It's just unrealistic, right? So making that steady, consistent progress and trying to get to 80%, not 100%, is what's going to propel you forward. And being realistic is important, right? Because we know that things might sound better in our head, but when we get down to, the actual work of it, things don't always pan out the way that we envision them, right? So working hard does not mean your users will find it valuable. We have to work smart. So keep it at 80, right? All right. So back to all these points in terms of the problem statement, all of these checklist items that we need to do as product designers. How else can we divvy up the work, right? So we can use sprints. So giving yourself timelines is a pretty effective way to organize this. I'm sure a lot of you have, a lot of familiarity with how sprints work, but I can kind of explain it just in a very brief way and how this sort of coincides with the 80% rule, right? So how do we manage this work, right? Let's say that all this stuff is given to a product designer, maybe one other designer. It's still a lot for just 2 people, right? So that's when sprints kick in. So in order to do this from a sprint perspective, a lot of teams use task managers, right? So whether it's Asana, DevOps, Trello, any task manager tool will do this to write user stories and acceptance criteria. And you can work with your development teams to kind of get this in place, right? Still keeping that 80% rule in mind, right? Because even through all the sprint work, we don't want to spin our wheels on taking 2 weeks just to find the problem statement, right? There might be a change anyway. And if the client changes their mind, we want to be able to adapt to that. So getting to that 80% margin and moving on is still going to help us move forward while meeting our requirements, right? And you can always go back and refine. So just that constant piece of information in your back pocket to not go for perfection, but to go for that 80% margin will still get you most of the way there. And then you can always go back and refine. And sprints 2 and 3 work the same way. And there could be more sprints. This is just the example that I'm given. But let's just say sprint 2, we have affinity mapping, story mapping, journey mapping, wireframes. Let's just say that's all done in like a 2-week period, right? That's still giving you that back pocket information of still try to get to 80%, right? Like we never want to continue to strive for that 100% mark because that's what's going to cause that burnout. So another way that this helps is knowing that if we get to something that seems perfect, we're going to get feedback that's going to change our minds, right? So we might have missed something or a feature might have slightly changed as a last minute request from the client. So what is the best way for us to deal with that? And that's by just lowering your expectation that things are going to go smoothly and you're going to get to the perfection mark. There's going to be issues and we have to adapt to that. Okay. And the last point is based on this whole 80% rule, product designers are never really done anyway, right? So you're never really going to get to 100% within a product. Product designers, a lot of the times, are responsible for staying on that product. It's just you're in it for the long haul, right? So even when something is shipped, you're still going to be testing it, you're still going to be refining it. And you guys all see that in the applications that you use every day. You're constantly getting new features. Figma alone is just cranking out feature after feature after feature. They're constantly going through that iterative process of making adjustments based on user feedback. So just knowing that you're never going to get to 100%, get close to 80, and it's a continuous process. All right. So what did we learn today? We learned the slight but powerful differences between product designers and UX designers, right? And what that was that leadership quality, right? More expected from the product designer. They're expected to lead. UX designers, it's a little bit more of a variable. Again, part of their job is to do a lot of the same things, but the product designer holds a little bit more weight because they're expected to know more. How do we speak like Jon Stewart, right? Picking your idol, pick someone that speaks well, that speaks slowly, that speaks with conviction. And just understanding that when you're on stage, it's good to not only know all of the material that's planned for that workshop session, but you have to convey it in a meaningful way, right? Using the power of live demos. We just built a dashboard in 10 minutes because we did the prep work, right? So we knew the research, we knew the problem statement, we knew the requirements, and collectively as a team, we all built a dashboard with the components that met the requirements and solved the problems for the users. And don't shoot for perfection. Get to 80%. This isn't a laundry list, right? I mean, it's a laundry list, but it's not just a laundry list, right? Like, we're working with product design methodology. So empathize with your users. Don't just cross things off your list. Your 100% may not be your user's 100%. And that's it. So we can open it up for questions. And Emily, if you have anything to add, you'd start there.
There. Now I'm back. Thanks so much, Evan. That was great. So yeah, everyone, if you have questions, we already have a couple. Evan, if you key over the questions section, you'll see that Hannah and Valerie have put some questions in there. And then if anyone else has questions, I would just encourage you to throw them into that little question section and Evan can go through them.
Sure. First one is from Valerie. Will you be sharing the presentation file? I didn't plan on it, but I can. I can make a public link. So after the call, let me see if I can do that. And maybe I can coordinate with the team here on how we can share that out. But yeah, I think we could do that.
And you'll get a recording too, Valerie, so you can always reference it later on. It'll be on our YouTube, so you'll be able to find it too.
All right, this one's from Hannah. It sounds like her question is, it sounds like product designers lead. Does that mean that there isn't such a thing as a junior product designer? My goal is to be a product designer, but do I need to start off as a UX UI designer first? That's a good question. Honestly, it's more of like the terminology. So I don't know if there's a junior product designer role that I've seen, but if it is, you could still put them in the same bucket. So if you're applying for like a product design role and it says junior product designer, or it says UX UI designer, just assume that you're going to be expected of the same things. What's going to differentiate you is how you lead in those scenarios, right? So whether the role that you're applying for is a junior product designer, a UX UI designer, just a UX designer, they all do essentially the same thing. What's going to bump you up into the product design space is how you lead, right? So showing that you have speaking skills and you can facilitate workshops. Those are the things that I would focus on. From a junior product designer standpoint, if that role does exist, I would think it's, maybe all the UX responsibilities, right? Maybe a little bit less leadership at first, but that can convert into a higher lead position. So I hope that helps. Another one from Hannah. When you talk about quality assurance, you mentioned working with devs, but can you talk a little bit more about what that is? Sure. So, and that's actually a really good segue, right? Because when you get into a product design role or a lead product design role, you're going to be a lot more immersed with the development teams. So what that entails is you should be familiar with their backlog, right? A lot of the times when we're working with task managers and we're shipping off design work to development teams, they use task managers to use something called story points, which is just collecting the amount of effort it's going to take for those developers to actually bring those designs to life and to code them, right? So it's really important that you know the backlog, what features they're working on, because you're going to have to send them Figma files for the design work for them to code. And also for the quality assurance part, when things are actually coded and they're doing their checks to make sure things are working correctly, you're also doing design checks, right? So when it's in that, they call it a QA environment, you want to make sure that what they're coding matches up with your design work. And if there's a bug or there's an issue, usually the best way to tackle that is to actually put that comment in the user story in their task manager. So, any communication tool will do that, but a lot of the times it's in something like Asana or Trello. And you'll just comment what the issue is. The developer will pick it up, make the revision, and then you can review it again to make sure everything's good. So that's part of the quality assurance piece. There's also cadence, meaning there's calls weekly to make sure that like things are looking good, everything's in check. If you have a healthy relationship with your development team, it helps that if they're proactive, they may ask you questions like on the fly, like, hey, this doesn't look, they may even check you like, hey, this doesn't look right. And then that's when it's good to go back and kind of reevaluate your design work. So that works both ways. But most importantly, it's good to have a very healthy relationship with your development team. Be friendly with them. They're bringing your design work to life. Okay. Those are the three I see. If there are any more, I'm happy to answer them. But oh wait, 4 new questions above. I missed that. What do we got here? So Sana. Is there a difference between a product design case study and a UX design case study, considering they create similar deliverables? Another really good question. I think there might be slight differences, just going back to the leadership approach. So in terms of the actual work, I would think they'd be pretty similar. So UX design case studies and product design case studies can look pretty much identical in terms of like the problem statement, the wireframing, iterations, ideation, story mapping, affinity mapping. I think all of that kind of fits in the same bucket. But where you can see the differences are maybe including like how you facilitated workshops. So somewhere in the case study, how you solve problems with the business, right? Not just end users. So those would be the subtle differences that I would recommend. Somewhere in the case study, showing your leadership skills and how you solve problems, and then how you met business needs, not just end user needs. Sammy's got one here. What type of efforts do you put into improving your skills as a designer? These are really good questions. So I am constantly reading and just doing my due diligence on like seeing what the latest trends are in the time that we're living in. So if I want just UI inspiration, like nothing else but like a fancy layout to like I love Figma, right? So like I'm constantly in Figma trying to make sure that my UI layouts are like, looking pretty good and like they're modern with the times. I use Dribble for that, right? Dribble is not really good for UX. They don't really have a lot of like research material, but just from a UI standpoint, I use Dribble to keep my craft up. In terms of like research, I go to medium.com, I go to UX Collective, just any like UX article sourcing where I can kind of just see like what the latest trends are in terms of like what I should be upping my game from like a research perspective. And then relying on other people. That's a big one, right? So like if you already have a UX design role, it helps to collaborate with other team members. See what they're doing, right? See what your competitors are doing. And it helps to be the dumbest person in the room sometimes. Like just being very honest, like it helps to just be with people that are a lot better than you and then understand what they're doing so that you can learn from them and be better at it. But I would say those 3 pieces are pretty big, right? Just knowing, what good UI layout looks like, research materials, just find any UX related articles to figure out what's going on in 2023 and talk to your peers. All right, we got another one here. Regarding the assets built for our doc app, would the assets have been built previously? I'm assuming we're iterating based on a previous version of the frame. So not sure I fully understand the question. Are you talking about, like if we're talking about, yeah, they were previously built. So I set those up for the demo. It was a little bit gated in the sense of that was very specific based on the problems that we were solving and the research that we were given and the materials, meaning the requirements coming from the end users, right? So that was a very tailored, specific example. In some cases, it could be a lot more loose, right? So if your question is like, that was easy because everything was pre-planned, sure, it was. But that's why it's successful. That's why you should be planned and you should have that pre-planning. But if you were to take it from more of like a loose approach where you want to go in and you don't know anything, maybe it's earlier in the process and you want to do live wireframe demoing, you could do that. I wouldn't advise it because you need to know a little bit more before you get into wireframing at that point. But if you were to do that, it could be a little bit more open form, right? So that could just be like a blank page. You ask your users what they need and you can kind of draw things out in real time. But again, I would say that's more in like the mid-flight, mid-cycle process, not in the beginning. Good question though. I think we got a few more here. Grace. So was there ever an instance where you did a live design demo, but the stakeholders still didn't understand the value of the design? How did you get past that? Absolutely. I've failed. There's definitely been scenarios where I've done like a live demo and it didn't work out well. How we handled it was, in the beginning, like one example I'm thinking of is in the beginning of the call, it was well received. And then there was a lot of people in the call, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and we couldn't get an agreement, right? So how we solved for that is towards the end of the call, we wrote down all the issues from every person. And then we had follow-up calls, but we did them in increments, right? So we started with like the first group, which is just 2 people, get them on board and making sure those first 2 people have like a high enough role where their input is really valuable, right? So we went back to the drawing board offline. We didn't do this with the team, just like a few people. We updated the design, updated the wireframes that we were working on, called just those 2 people back, and then just explained to them like, hey, based on just your feedback, this is what we changed. And it was well received. And then we kind of trickled that into the other groups. But the important thing to note is you will get, and this sort of goes back to the 80% rule, right? You will get most people on board if you do enough homework and get the design in good enough shape, but you're not going to appease everybody. I'm not sure if Matthew Voshell is on the call. He's actually one of the guys that mentored me a little bit. He had a really good saying that I wanted to repeat here. And his saying was, if you're designing for everyone, you're designing for no one. So what that means is you can get close, but if you try to design for every single person, it's not going to work out. And it's eventually going to break. So get to that 80% and, make progress from there. All right. So next one here is from Hannah. We got 10 minutes here, so we got some time. What are your thoughts, opinions, experiences of having design work represented in stories in the same backlog as the dev? Let me read that one more time. What are your thoughts, opinions, experiences of having design work represented in stories in the same backlog as devs? Okay, good question. Right now they're separated. So how I work with my team is we have our own design backlog, and then the dev teams have their own dev backlog. The only thing that we share from design on the dev backlog are the Figma links for them to use to code. But in terms of story points, like effort, they're not joined. I've seen some teams share them and some teams that don't share them. My personal opinion is they should be separated because it's too messy when they're combined. But I have seen teams pull it off. I think if you have a really good product owner, a really good product manager, and the development and design relationship is really good, that can work. But from what I've seen, it doesn't work out so well because things get messy. Design effort is measured differently from development effort, right? So, the Fibonacci sequence for development teams, right? Like, it's story points are on a certain numerical system, right? So how that works is different from how design team members think about it, right? We might just look at it as like t-shirt sizing. So designers might just think, okay, like this feature is going to be a medium or this feature is going to be a large. Developers a lot more specific about it. So that's why I think it doesn't work and they need to be separated, but I could be proved wrong. Maybe eventually it's going to work out and they can be in one user story. So good question. All right, I'm just going to keep plugging along here and see how much we can get. So Julie, have you ever encountered any difficulty pitching a design or having a design rejected by a stakeholder or developer? If so, how can you navigate this kind of conversation? Yeah, it's sort of a similar question that we had before. We have pitched something where it wasn't well received, and just how to navigate around that conversation is just, like being honest with them, saying like, okay, like let's slow down. Like let's understand the real problems here. Is it a UI issue? Is it UX issue? Like what don't you like about this, or what isn't solving your problems? And we get that answer. And then what we normally say is, all right, we're going to reevaluate this with the team. We're going to go back, try to make some revisions, and then we're going to do a follow-up call. So it's pretty common. That happens. A lot of the times, I wouldn't say a lot, but you know, a good amount of the times is those things happen and you just have to adapt, right? And it's not necessarily your fault. Clients change their mind all the time. I think everyone's aware of that. And even designers change their minds all the time. But clients definitely will say one thing in the beginning of the process and then they may change their mind at the end. So I wouldn't take it personally. It's just, you know, they may have changed their mind or your design wasn't well received and you just have to make adjustments. But for the most part, how we handle that is just on the call. We just say, you know, let us reevaluate that. And then we do another follow-up call to make sure that the next round goes better and we hit the mark. David, how do you manage a client that wants fast results and doesn't value research? I say no. That's a tricky one, but if they want fast results and don't value research, I politely say no. I tell them that this is how it works. If you want good design work and you want to have a valuable product, these things take time. And if they push for it, you know, there's a saying that, you know, if you think good design is expensive, can you imagine how expensive bad design is, right? So let's go with that scenario. If the client wants fast results and and they don't value research, and you ship them a poorly built product and they just lose revenue and they don't get users, whose fault is that on? I mean, they're going to push it on you, but it's technically the client, right? So showing examples definitely helps, right? So how we manage that is we show examples of these are examples of products that were built fast and poorly, and they ended up costing more money because of all the rework, right? So we just show them examples and we politely say, no, we have a process. This is how it works. And, you know, for the most part, they still stay on the hook, right? We can extend deadlines, but that's more on their part, that they have to do their homework to understand how much time this actually takes and the effort involved. Good question. Okay, I think we got.
We probably have time for like one more question, Evan.
Yeah, yep. You could stop me whenever. So I'll do this last one, then I'll stop talking. I'll shut up after this. Thanks, Emily. Kelvin, so how do you handle a disagreement with a shareholder? It depends on what the disagreement is and what you mean by shareholder. So I mean, I would still mimic the things that I said before, right? Like you can be polite a bit about it, but it really depends on what the disagreement is, right? Like if it's that they're not meeting your business goals, then that's back to the reevaluate piece. You have to go back with your team and understand, like, are you still meeting their needs? If it's a disagreement that's like UX or UI related, or they don't like something in a prototype, you know, that's back to the designer, you know, what can you do to fix it? It really depends on what the disagreement is. So I think I would need a little bit more context there, but another good question. Okay. I didn't get to all of them, but I know we're almost at time. So yeah, if you want to hop back in, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for answering all those questions, Evan. I'm sure it's really appreciated by the audience. And thank you so much, everyone who came out today, for your insightful questions. We had a lot of really great discussion points. So that's awesome. Very dynamic. Just as a reminder, everybody, you'll be getting some emails from us after the presentation wraps up with some recording information if you're interested in getting involved in Design Lab. If you have questions about anything at all, you can feel free to get in touch with me and my team at admissions@designlab.com. I just popped the email in the chat. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much again, Evan.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.